Welcome to Power Up Your Practice, the go-to podcast for law firm owners and managing attorneys working on the business, not in it. I'm Ruby Powers, your guide into the heart of law practice management, bringing your insights from leading legal minds, trailblazing attorneys, and expert guests who provide practical perspectives on running your firm more effectively and efficiently. And before we dive in, I'm thrilled to announce that my latest book, Power Up Your Practice, is out and available on Amazon. It's packed with actionable advice for growing a successful law firm. Be sure to grab your copy today. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive tips and resources. And if you're enjoying this podcast, we love your reviews. They help us reach more attorneys like you who are striving to build the practice of their dreams. Prepare to open your mind, be inspired, and power up your practice to the next level. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Again, it's Ruby Powers with Power Up Your Practice. I have Anna Rappaport, who's the founder and principal of Excelleration Coaching. And she's a former lawyer with 25 years of experience coaching lawyers on business development, leadership, and career strategy. She helps individual lawyers and legal teams communicate and collaborate more effectively, which enables them to have deeply satisfying careers, productive teams, and thriving law firms, which of course, I think we all want that. Welcome, Anna. It's great to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
So how did you get into this? And, just, I guess, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I actually started coaching before I even went to law school. It was something I started doing during that period before, I was out of school for 6 years between undergrad and law school. And during that time, I went through a leadership development program. And once you went through it as a participant, you could go through it as a coach. So I got a lot of training and experience, and it was something I absolutely loved, but I wasn't really seeing it as a career. It was just kind of something I was doing on the side. But then after going to law school and trying a couple different jobs, I realized that, I heard some people can make a living at this, so let me give it a try. So that's how I got into coaching. And then, of course, once you're doing it, you start learning things like business development because you're on the ground really learning how to do that. And as a former lawyer, of course, I tended to attract lawyers. So that became my niche. Also, I've lived abroad a few different places, including after starting my coaching practice. So I lived in Turkey. I think we've talked about that at some point because you've also lived in other countries.
Right.
And so a lot of what I do relates to communication, and having the international perspective, I think, can be really helpful because there's just so many different angles on how people communicate.
Yeah, you've lived in Japan, Thailand, Turkey, to name a few. And I've lived in Turkey and UAE, Mexico, Spain, Belgium. Yeah, and I agree with you. I actually got into that type of thing too in college, where it was about intercultural communication, and I was so fascinated by it. And I was in international business and things like that. And so I think that's interesting because today we were planning to talk about difficult conversations, and there can be a lot of difficult conversations when there's misunderstandings or you're just wanting to broach a tough talk. And so I remember having some of those when I was in foreign countries, but even in my own office. So, so I think that when people think about difficult conversations, there's a combination of maybe avoiding conversations because they don't know how to have that conversation or how it should go. Are you supposed to sandwich, some positive, what you really need to tell them, and then whatever, and I think there's a lot of, this is sort of like on one of those elements of management and delegation that many of us lawyers, I think just people in general, we learn sort of the hard way, and sometimes we're not getting it from a course or from a coach. So how would you guide someone through on how to have those, to actually have those conversations and to walk them through the best way to have those difficult conversations?
Yeah, well, it definitely depends on what kind of conversation we're talking about, certainly. But I have a bunch of different questions I will ask people. But in general, I think of it as being three general buckets of places to start when you're thinking about how to prepare for these conversations. And the first is just getting really clear about what you want people to take away from the conversation. Like, what is your message? Which sounds so basic. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, pretty much every time I sit down and ask someone that question, there's a lot of uncertainty about it, right? They're not necessarily sure what they want to say, often because the thing they want to say feels like something they shouldn't say, might be inappropriate,
Oh,
isn't
yeah.
quite on the mark. So I usually start by asking people, like, what is the really blunt version of what you would want to say? Right? Like, what is the most straightforward? Feel free to use profanity. Like, just say the thing that you want to say. And often, what they want to say is actually not inappropriate at all. Something like, this is a professional environment and you need to dress professionally. Or, it's not acceptable to blow through deadlines. You need to actually get your work done on time or let me know with a reasonable amount of notice. Like, these are not unreasonable things to say. And yet, often, like you said, people avoid having these conversations. And because you have avoided it, you didn't bring it up here and you didn't bring it up that time. And then you didn't bring it up the next time. So by the time you actually raise it, you're so annoyed and
Yeah.
frustrated that it just, people are more likely to kind of blow their top, right? Which
Right.
is why all the preparation is important.
Yeah.
And
And the receiver just sees you upset as opposed to, like, if you would have like calmed yourself down and said it before it escalated, it'd be better to communicate it that way.
right. And even if you say things calmly, though, sometimes it can still be really worthwhile to think through what is the clearest possible version of what you want to say. So for
Mm-hmm.
example, right, like you want to say, this is, dress professionally. Your version of dressing professionally and my version, and someone who came from a different background or is younger or whatever, they might have very different ideas. So just saying dress professionally is not sufficient in many cases. Because I don't think there's a lot of people who are coming to work thinking, I'm going to show them I'm going to be unprofessional, right? So things like that, or take ownership of your cases. Okay, good, but what does that mean? What
Yeah.
exactly are you asking the person for? That's the kind of thing that can make a huge difference when you sit down and really dig down into the details of what you want to say.
So we met through ABA law practice division type of work. And on another call I had with some other division committee members, we're talking about generational differences. I could see how generational differences have different interpretations, but having like the whole living abroad can completely have a different perspective on things like what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, if we would use the clothing example at work. But that's that. I think the generational aspect can have a big component to communication. What were some of the other, you said the other buckets that you have, or what you're walking through? That's a good point. I mean, what are you trying to convey? That's the first step.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's basic, and yet often doesn't happen. So the second thing I would say is really connecting to people. And what I mean by that is, again, because people are often very frustrated, you're not thinking about the person's best qualities. You're thinking about all the things that are aggravating you about them in that moment. And yet, if you want them to really hear what you have to say, being able to think of them as the excellent professional, dedicated, smart, whatever good qualities they have, like orienting yourself towards thinking about that helps you go into the conversation in a respectful way, right? So that's like one piece of it. Another piece is letting the person know what your intention is in raising the issue.
Hmm.
Because sometimes people just feel like, oh, that person's just trying to criticize me, right? Like that's kind of one of those
Yeah.
default places people might go in their own minds. So when you go into a conversation saying, I'm raising this because there is, I'm concerned about the effect this is having on our team. And I know you're really committed to collaboration and teamwork. You've demonstrated that here, here, and here. And so I thought you would also want to know that this is an issue, right? Like, so you orient it towards things people care about, their values, things that are already great about them, and let them know that there's a reason behind raising something. Or like, I'm not just criticizing you, I actually think that you're wonderful, and therefore you have a possibility of a great future here. And in order to live up to that great future, here's something else, that needs to be addressed. Things like that.
That's a really good point. Before we go to the next one, because I feel like it's a cliffhanger, we're going to have words of one of our sponsors. Are you feeling overwhelmed by administrative, marketing, or other legal tasks? Well, you're not alone. Many lawyers are in the same boat. They're trying to build up their firm, and they're trying to figure out how to get help to do so. So that's where Staffy comes in. So over 90 law firm owners, just like you, have turned to Staffy for help with their legal, administrative, marketing, and client-facing work. Staffy's mission is to help lawyers find balance while growing their firm with bilingual virtual staff and full HR support. And they take the hassle out of the team management and focus on what matters most, your clients and your practice. I've personally benefited from multiple staff support with about 8 virtual assistants over the last few years with my 2 businesses, including my law firm, Powered Law Group. Now schedule a free consultation with Staffy. It's stafi.cc, and you can use the code RUBY, that's RUBY, for a $500 off coupon. Oh, so thank you for walking through this. It does seem simple, but yet I think it's a good reminder. And I think you've really, I feel like I need to write this down and make sure I'm doing it when I'm having these conversations. So what do we do? I think that's a good point of letting them know where we're coming from, and what our reason for bringing up the conversation, because it will, to hear that criticism, or it might seem like it's criticism, but it's not. It can be, you can put your guard up and stop maybe listening, depending on your background. And so what do you do next in the conversation?
Yeah. So the third thing is you actually need to end powerfully. But what I mean by that is, very often you will have this conversation. You get really clear, like, this is the issue, and you're engaging with the person. Maybe you've come up with questions to ask them to try and really dig down into what the core of the issue is. Whatever you're doing during that segment where you're being respectful and connected. But then you need to end in a way that sends the message, this isn't just a conversation. You actually expect something to change, right? The behavior needs to change. And if you don't put something in place to ensure that happens, the odds are good that it won't, right? So something like, is there a follow-up? If you have regular one-on-ones with somebody, obviously checking in with them about that. Like, okay, we're going to check in and talk about this. It's going to be on our agenda for our one-on-ones. So they know this is not a one-time thing. Mm-hmm. Or you can also think about, like, what other structures do the people would serve the person in order to kind of change this behavior. This is where kind of a coaching mentality comes in. It seems it might seem really silly to people, but if you think about it as, okay, they want to change something, there's some habit or some behavior or something that needs to change. Well, what structures would help? Is putting notes in their calendar going to help? Are there reminders? Are there conversations with people? Do you practice? Like, what actually are the steps that are going to help the person to change whatever the thing might be? So getting clear that there's going to be follow-up. And sometimes it's more of an attitudinal thing, right? And then maybe it's just saying to the person, hey, are you willing to try this? Or next time this thing comes up, would you be willing to come to me and talk to me first? Right? Just getting someone to agree to something, even if it's something a little bit more abstract, that
Hmm.
also can be really powerful.
Yeah, I've seen that. And also I've heard recently a wise person told me, like, if there's not consequences to behavior or a change, then they'll just continue doing so. And I thought about that. Like, for example, like this isn't just like a, just a suggestion. This is like that we need to see this difference, or whatever. And we're talking about in general difficult conversations, but generally we're probably asking or wanting something to be different, or we're telling them that if you don't do whatever, your job could be in jeopardy, for example. So these types of conversations in a professional setting.
Well, that's one of the things that I think is so important about this, is because when people avoid having these conversations, then things get worse and worse. And then you
Yeah,
have more of these situations where you
right.
really are, you're either putting up with someone who really shouldn't be there,
Right.
or, or you're firing someone and feeling terrible about it. And most of the time, there's somewhere earlier on where you can have a conversation that's essentially saying, hey, this is what's necessary if you want to
Mhm.
continue to work here. I mean, again, you can do it in a gentle way, you can do it in a way that really is collaborative, right? But most of the time people are just so uncomfortable, they avoid it, and then they don't get that opportunity to be able to say, hey, is this really the right place for you? Because if you want to stay, I will help you, train you, blah blah blah, whatever the thing is. Or if it's not, like, I'll give you a recommendation, I'll help you. Like,
Mhm.
those kinds of conversations people are so terrified of having, and yet the people who do them, it generally works really well.
No,
And
I agree. Like, and the more you prolong something, a bad fit, or you don't document it, because I think from the law firm owner perspective, it's like, well, we should have documented this so that we can protect ourselves from unemployment, right, or in right, Texas TWC and that type of thing. But and that's also, it just needs to be clear, because the person doesn't know what's in your head, and maybe you're upset and they don't even know why you're upset. So, like, this is why you need to communicate. And I honestly think the reason why I wanted to talk about this today was because I think this is really where it sort of takes differentiates better managers and leaders than others, because I think this is a skill set that it's so critical for being able to communicate these difficult conversations. Can sort of make that separation. Before I learned how to do this type of thing, I had a lot more turnover. I think it was because I was holding on to people. I was avoiding letting go, or telling them that they weren't following the rules or the policy and meeting their job description. And I really think delegation and management is an area of where a lot of law firm owners and managers, partners, struggle initially, and maybe throughout a lot of their career. So I'm really glad you're explaining all of this.
You know, one thing that I have found fascinating, because I've had so many conversations with people who feel like they need to fire someone and there's so much discomfort. And, sometimes the person knows. It's not that they are surprised that this is coming. I mean, sometimes people are, but, like, I had someone I worked with who, she needed to, like, her firm had grown, and because of the language needs, she needed a receptionist who spoke other languages that the current receptionist didn't. And she had started working with this receptionist. She had a real commitment to her. She felt terrible, months and months and months of feeling terrible about the fact that she was really going to need to fire this woman. So, but when she did, the receptionist said, well, I was kind of surprised it took you so long. Right? And I've been kind of waiting for you to do this because I knew I'd get my severance, and then I was planning on going and traveling. So I have a plan. I'm going to go travel, right? So you just never know what's going to come up for people. And can I say something else about the
Yeah,
clarity piece?
yeah, absolutely.
Um, you know, Sometimes people also say, like, oh, but I'm really clear. I'm really clear. And they're still not doing the thing I've asked for.
Uh-huh.
Right. And I think that there's a few things that can be happening in that situation. Right. One is that as much as we try, we can be sending mixed messages. Right.
Mm,
I had a client who said, I've told the associate again and again, if you don't understand something, if you have any questions, reach out
mhm,
to me, right? Ask me. I'm open. My door's open. You should totally come to me. Why isn't she doing this? And I don't know, I wasn't there, but just in general, sometimes it's because we're sending mixed messages, right? Some other associate went in and came out looking traumatized, after talking to the person. Or they always look so busy that it never seemed like there was a good opportunity. Or maybe the partner gave them kind of a funny look when they asked a question. There's all kinds of ways in which we can unknowingly send mixed messages. So that's one possibility. Another is that, um, sometimes, like we talked about cultural differences, right? There's this, I don't know if you're familiar with this idea of low context, high context communication.
mhm.
And so for people who might not be as familiar with this, like low context communication means sort of a more typically American style in that it's more direct. You don't need to have a lot of outside knowledge in
Yeah.
order to understand what's being communicated, right? It
Right.
sounds really clear. If you don't understand something, come talk to me. Very straightforward. But in a low context, a high context culture, a lot of the understanding is just understood, so they don't necessarily say everything. And what
Mhm.
you're expected to do as a good communicator in cultures that are more high context is to look under the surface. And so somebody who's, speaking from a low context culture says something straightforward is mystified how someone else cannot be understanding them. And yet the other person might be looking for what's the other meaning that's there. This is something I actually come across pretty frequently in coaching people. Partly I work with a lot of people who's maybe first or second generation Americans, but even for people who are not from other cultures. My husband is white, middle class, American. In theory, we should be from kind of the same cultural communication. Um, and yet we're not. I mean, my family had very different communication style than his family does. And he said things to me like, well, but what do you really mean? And I'm thinking, I'm telling you what I really mean. How can you not believe me? It's just weird. To me, it's mystifying, right? And so that sort of thing can happen as well. And that's not even going into the fact that sometimes the things we're asking of people are things that make them very stressed, right? Like if you're
Mhm.
saying to your associate or your staff person, like,
Mhm.
just send me what you have, even if it's not finished, so that I can make sure you're on track. And the person has been a perfectionist their entire life. That's what had them succeed in undergrad. It's what had them succeed in law school. And now you're asking them to do this thing that feels deeply uncomfortable, to send them something that's incomplete. It's not lack of understanding, but it's the anxiety and all that goes with it. So there's a lot of different pieces that can go along with this. And I think just kind of understanding that if someone's not doing something that you've asked them to, there might be reasons that are, we'll just say, legitimate, as opposed to because they're all the judgmental places your mind might go, right? Maybe they're stupid. Maybe they're being deliberately difficult. Maybe they don't like you. Maybe, there's all kinds of places that our minds might go when people are not behaving the way we think they ought to.
That's a really good point. Are there any good books or resources for people who are interested in growing in this space to be better communicators?
There are so many good books. Like years ago, I thought about writing. I was like, I'm going to write a communication book. And I went out and looked and I thought there's already a lot of really great communication books. So I didn't, or not yet anyway. Things like there's difficult conversations, crucial conversations.
Mhm.
There's the stuff on nonviolent communication, which is also really great. uh, I think probably, yeah, those are the places I would start.
Oh yeah, I think I have some of those actually. Um, so we I think that there's just so much to this conversation, but as we're sort of going to the next topic of sort of my rapid fire questions, I think that this is just a good reminder about how important that there's just so much context to communication. And one thing I think about is I'm usually doing one thing to the next, boom, 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 and maybe I say there's an open door, but it doesn't look like there is really one because my calendar is booked minute to minute. But I think that was a really good reminder about the low context to high context because as an immigration attorney, I'm working with people from all the different countries, and I think I just sort of get used to it that I'm speaking to people in their first, second, third language, or there's a lot to it, sort of being that bridge between them and the adjudicator in immigration. But there's a lot to take in. I'm going to have to think through this, but I think a lot of times with the difficult conversations, it's usually either I'm trying to correct a behavior or clarify something that might have something to do with their job, or performance. It's usually the only types of difficult conversations that end. But also that's the staff. But when we're talking also about clients having difficult conversations about having to say, maybe your case got denied, or maybe there's not a really good chance of this getting approved. And I think we've all found that the more you delay having that direct conversation, the more trouble you're going to have, and the harder it is to justify why you took so long to have that conversation with the client as well. So that's another place where we have to grow the muscle of the communication as an attorney as well.
Well, and that brings up the question of kind of how to manage your own internal emotional reactions to things, right? Because it's not that this stuff is intrinsically difficult, right? It
Mm-hmm.
just becomes difficult when you are feeling stressed out and scared and nervous about the reaction. Like, oh, if I tell them the client this thing, are they going to fire me? Are they going to submit a bar complaint? Like, what is going to happen after we have this conversation? Right. Or maybe they'll just get mad and I'm not comfortable with people who get angry, right? All kinds of issues. I'm not that anybody likes it, right? But some people more than others find it particularly, distressing.
Yes.
So, I mean, having tools for processing one's emotions, I think is also really, really important. And I mean, it's not just, yeah, go talk to your therapist, go talk to a coach, go talk to a friend. I mean, that stuff is great. And not necessarily, always accessible or always the right fit for a particular person. I mean, we all know the thing that probably most of our parents said to us back in the day, like, take a deep breath or go
Yeah.
outside and run around, or right.
Right.
There's all those sorts of things. There's one tool that I think is shockingly not nearly as well known as I think it ought to be, called expressive writing. Have you heard about this from James Pennebaker?
I think
It,
so.
yeah, should I mention it or not?
Go ahead. No, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Um, this is the tool, and it's designed for dealing with traumatic experiences. But traumatic experiences can be very loosely defined, right? Traumatic experience could be sometime back 5 years ago when a former client got mad at you and submitted a bar complaint, right? That could be the traumatic experiences. We're not talking like necessarily deep trauma. But what you do is when you're finding yourself to be upset about something, or that if it's still bothering you, it's still something that you're concerned about, things like that often will recur in a professional context, right? It's not just personal things. And this particular exercise is where you sit down for 15 to 20 minutes at 4 different times, like 4 days in a row, and write about the thing there's 4 different prompts. The first one, you just write about the event, the experience, just the way you would normally think about it. The second time you do it, you go through thinking about it from a bigger picture, right? Like the bigger picture of generational issues or the economy or history, or like do just anything that helps you get a larger perspective on it. And then the third prompt, you think about it in terms of like writing from the perspective of somebody else, maybe someone who maybe didn't behave particularly well. Right. And then the fourth one, you think about the event from the perspective of like, you're an old person, like, what have you learned from it? What effect has it had on your life? How has it, helped you grow? Things like that. And the thing that's cool about this is it's shockingly effective. There's tons of research supporting how well this works in terms of reducing stress, reducing like health issues. And I think the reason it's not more popular is two things. One, a lot of people aren't very comfortable with writing. However, with lawyers, a lot of us are more comfortable being able to sit down and write. So if you're finding like something is like a recurring issue again and again, and you don't want to deal with a coach or a therapist or, some other formal thing, this is a tool it's really great. There's a book that explains all about it. I have a little thing I wrote up on my website that explains it. So if, I could send it to you and you can put it in the show notes.
Well, actually, that's a good point.
Really
how can people find you if they want to follow up and stay in touch?
Yeah, my website is accelerationcoaching.com. It's a cross between excellence and to accelerate. So unfortunately, it's not a real word, right? EX, not AC. But I assume it'll be visible on your on the podcast.
Yeah. And then you're also on like LinkedIn or other ways to find you. Yeah.
Yep. Anna Rappaport on LinkedIn, or Coach Anna, I think. Coach Anna, it shows up somehow like that.
So it's been great learning about this, and that's a great exercise. I think another point might be is that no one's charging you to just sit down and write, it's another reason why it might not be so widely known, or like breathing exercises. I mean, you really could do that on your own if you really know good techniques, but I think that's really important. We need to know how to self-regulate, and we're better leaders, and our team, our staff, our clients, our family, our community are depending on us. So we have sort of a higher standard than other professions, I think, in some respects, and especially in our leadership role, if we're law firm owners or partners and or right-hand associates moving up the chain. What is a really good podcast or book you would recommend for listeners?
This isn't new or anything, but I just recently read The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. It's maybe 10 years old or something. And it's obviously it's about joy, but it's about kindness and compassion and that sort of thing, which, as you would imagine, being written by them. But I think it's just a really good reminder, since most of us want to be kind, we want to certainly be joyful. And when we are focused on work, sometimes we're so oriented towards the concrete, like get things done, be efficient, and all of that's important. But we can lose kind of the joy and the serenity and the sort of the more, and when I say spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religious, but just the part of ourselves that can help stay more grounded, that can help connect with people. So those parts are relevant for work, right? In addition to just feeling better, it also tends to help us be less frustrated and upset when things go wrong, or talk to people in a way that is more connected. So there's business value to it as well as sort of personal value.
No, I definitely see that. And I've been going on like a journey to explore more, ways to better communicate and to stay calm and be in tune with myself and all of those things, because, a lot of what we do can be very stressful, and we're working with people all the time. So it's really important as leaders. Well, Anna, it's been really great having you on the show. I know we could talk even more, but I think this was a good topic, especially for law firm leaders, about difficult conversations, whether it's with staff, with someone else, a colleague, another professional, or with their own clients. So definitely, everyone, you can reach out to Anna in the future on LinkedIn, Excelleration Coaching, and really appreciate your time.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Up Your Practice Law Practice Management podcast. I'm your host, Ruby Powers, and it's been a pleasure sharing this time with you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a review, tell someone else about us, and we'd love to get this podcast shared with others to reach more listeners like you. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive content, tips, and updates straight to your inbox. And exciting news, our book, The Power Up Your Practice, is out and available on Amazon. It's packed with strategies, 25 chapters, to help you elevate your practice and achieve your goals. So join us next week as we dive into more advice and insight on law practice management. We'll see you next time.